Welcome back. Today we have the pleasure of testing the new Roto TNT. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell if you like to see our videos. If you like what we do, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe and check us out on Patreon. First impressions, we expected the TNT to be a benchmark ball. It looks benchmark-like, but it feels like we'll need a little bit more time before we bench the Phase 2 or idle. Alright, let's jump in. So first I'll say the TNT, fabulous name. We were surprised no one's used it before that we can recall. I guess there was a Triumph TNT, but anyway. So we have E-Trax Plus cover stock, which is going to be a little stronger than the, let's say, cleaner E-Trax, but not as strong as the Microtrax, which is a nanotech cover. The only previous iteration I'm aware of was on the RSTX2, but that was in Pearl. Now they have also this new Torpex core. It's fairly close to benchmark specs and shape. I prefer, if you look at the core itself, that one end of these type of cores is flat, but whatever. Also, it uses what they call a torque sphere in the center, some kind of like power ball in the high road or other balls from the past. The idea is to make it even more center heavy and reduce the RG. A lot of technical stuff, but it amounts to a pretty controllable reaction on lane. The 2000 grit solid gives enough traction to slow down the ball where needed. The core is not very flippy, but it's a pretty strong arc despite the higher differential. I'm sure in a different cover this core will do something else. Here it isn't like super archy for me, nor is it flippy. It seems like a nice balance, and I would say this seems to be somewhere in between a strong control and mid control for me as a bowler, and it doesn't quite feel strong enough for the strong control slot like a Phase 2 or idle. It doesn't feel necessarily weak enough to fit in the mid control, and that's where my biggest struggle is. I mean, here are a few shots with the Phase 2 so you can see what I mean. Same surface finish in the Phase 2 is clearly more ball. Where I think the TNT will come into its own and become a benchmark is when it lane shines a bit or has less surface and it can fit in the mid-control category more squarely. Tyler's next, and at first he was a little deeper, thinking it'll be a bit bigger than it was. Looked a bit lazy, but ultimately he was simply too deep. So once he moved right, the ball started to look like what it was intended to be. He found a nice spot somewhere between the third and fourth arrow. When he was closer to the third arrow, he's able to get out to that 5, 6, 7 break point. When he's around 18 or so, getting close to the fourth arrow, the ball will not make it uphill from there, if you go all the way out to 5, 6, 7. So he had to move his break point into, say, like 9 or 10. So the ball was somewhat limited in overall board coverage. Well, I guess not that it doesn't cover boards per se, but it seemed to have a bit of a lazy look if you asked it to cover too much. It's one of those balls that I would say, maybe needs to cover shallower angles if you want to impart more energy at the pins. And with the right angles and understanding of the ball, it worked really well. But it was a little bit of a surprise for Tyler that the shape and limitation isn't exactly how he would classify a benchmark for him, especially given how much he enjoys the whole idle lineup. The idle doesn't have that limitation for him. He can get pretty deep and without a problem. And as you can see here next to the Phase 2, you can see that while the Phase 2 can be in a similar zone, it is more continuous with more back end. So it wants to drive harder, and therefore the shallower angles are actually harder with the Phase 2. So in a way, it's different enough for them to actually be complements. Next up was Brian, and I would say the TNT was maybe a surprise struggle. Dull balls can be tricky for Brian, but it really depends on the motor. If the cover is strong enough to push Brian in, the motor better have the wheels to recover, or the torque. Brian's best look was, I would say, straight up the second arrow. And if you take those shots in isolation, if all I showed you was strikes there, the ball looks great. But for us to get information across, as to what the ball is doing for Brian, we have to explain and show you more. Now, when Brian tried more direct, the ball burned up. It just didn't like being in the friction that early. It just kind of stopped. And when he tried to move left, the ball just didn't have the giddy up to get to the pocket. He did have to move everything parallel in. But I would say couldn't really get the TNT to face up as well. And I feel like it really goes back to what I said initially. The TNT is caught a little bit in no man's land in terms of what it is. It's not quite strong control, which the Motive Forge fits for Brian, for example, but its cover is a little too strong to fit in the mid control. I do think the cover is a touch too strong for the core. So let's close out on the TNT. I think the Roto Grip TNT could fit in, as I said, either strong control or mid control, but not squarely in either out of the box, and will definitely depend on the bowler and conditions as usual. This was probably, I would say, closest to being a benchmark for my game, and I'm a rev speed match player. What I would likely do is lane shine it or take it to 3000, which would allow it to be a proper step down from my Phaze 2 and give it a bit more versatility. As a lefty especially, this could be just the ticket in that very hard to fill mid control ball.